Good day, my friends. Today we're going to be looking at the Google Pixel 9 Pro XL against the iPhone 16 Pro Max. This is a very comprehensive test. I'm really hoping it's the only one that you need to watch because I'm going to cover everything, both photo and video. I'm going to start with photo first, but I'm going to look at basic and professional settings. We're going to look at RAW, dynamic range, highlight control, macro mode, low light, 5x optical zoom, the Apple ProRes, the 8K video feature, the slow motion, and so much more. If you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment below, like and subscribe. We have more content coming soon. I want to thank Sahara for having me once again for this comparison video, and for this one, let's get started. Okay, here we have a side-by-side landscape, both primary cameras. Now let's highlight that tree real quick, as I'm going to be zooming into the 5x optical zoom. Now the Pixel 9 Pro there in 5x optical zoom does maintain 48 megapixel, and I think that does make a difference. Moving on here, still with the primary camera. And moving back over to that 5x optical zoom. Here we're moving over to the ultra wide lens. Now one thing I do want to mention here with the 16 Pro Max is it's 48 megapixel as well in the ultra wide lens. That's a really nice feature that they've upgraded with. Now for this next set of images, we're going to be looking at some RAW settings, starting here with the Pixel 9 Pro XL in JPEG, and now moving over to the Pixel 9 Pro in RAW. And we can see there that the Pixel 9 Pro XL does have more dynamic range in the highlights and in the shadows when you move over to the RAW setting. And here the 16 Pro Max in 48 megapixel in RAW. Here's a side-by-side RAW image, the 16 Pro Max there on the right, both cameras doing really well. Now for these two images, back to standard mode. And between that set of photos, to me, yes, the RAW imagery is a little softer and it would require more editing, but I think overall, since you get more dynamic range, more color information, you can do more with the RAW images and get a lot out of them. Now for this next set, I'm going to move over to some low light imagery, but I will come back to that RAW testing soon. Here we have the Pixel 9 Pro, and here's that 16 Pro Max. And here's that ultra wide lens on that Pixel 9 Pro, and the ultra wide lens on the 16 Pro Max. And here in low light, I think both cameras do well with noise, but the colors are much different. Now for this next set of photos, I'm moving over to some farm landscapes, some horses, some people, and really I think overall some great imagery to look at for a comparison. With these two images, we'll start with the primary camera, both at 50 and 48 megapixel. And here's another side by side, and you can see that both cameras are very detailed. Okay, here we are in portrait mode, both cameras set to auto white balance. And we can see that both cameras render the colors differently. I think the 16 Pro Max was a little bit more true to life as far as the color of the horse, but yet in the sky, the Pixel 9 Pro XL was actually more true to life. Moving back now over to the primary camera here. And here's the Pixel 9 Pro. And the 16 Pro Max. Another wide shot here with the Pixel 9 Pro. And there's that 16 Pro Max once again. Overall, throughout all my testing, I mentioned this just previously, that it does seem like the 16 Pro Max does render the green channels a little bit more prominent than does the Pixel 9 Pro XL. Here we are with the Pixel 9 Pro XL. And moving over to the 16 Pro Max now. And now moving over to the 5x optical zoom. Now I'm going to punch in real quick 200% and let's see if that 48 megapixel on that 5x optical zoom does make a difference. Indeed it does, my friends. The Pixel 9 Pro there on the left is sharper. One thing that I wish Apple would have done with this 16 Pro Max is brought that 48 megapixel to that 5x optical zoom like they did with the ultra wide lens, because it does make a difference. Now here we are in portrait mode once again. And let's look at the macro mode. Now here you would think that this is portrait mode, but it's actually the primary cameras. Very impressive bokeh and image quality. And now here we are once again in portrait mode. We can see the 16 Pro Max does render skin tones a little warmer. Now here for this next set, I wanted to do some extreme backlight. I'm starting in JPEG with the Pixel 9 Pro, and you can see some color banding there in the sky. As I move on to the RAW setting, that banding is gone because there's more color information there with the RAW setting, so it does make a difference. Overall, it maintains smoother gradients, and we also have more dynamic range and shadow and highlight detail. And now moving over to the 16 Pro Max in RAW. So there in that test, we can see that if you have really tricky lighting, that RAW processing does make a difference. Now moving over to a side-by-side in RAW. I also wanted to test the 12 megapixel RAW setting. Here we have it with the Pixel 9 Pro XL. And there's the 16 Pro Max. I think if I'm shooting RAW, I'm gonna go full resolution, unless I'm in extreme low light. Now for these next tests, let's go ahead and continue with RAW. Now with the wide shot, with the Pixel 9 Pro XL, still with RAW, 50 megapixel. And there's that 48 megapixel RAW with the 16 Pro Max. Now back over to standard photo mode, still using the primary camera. Here's another side-by-side, both primary cameras. And here's that 5x optical zoom. And I'm gonna go ahead and crop in that 200%. And once again, we can see when we crop in, there on the left, the Pixel 9 Pro with that 48 megapixel, it's a little bit sharper. And now moving back over to the primary cameras. Here's that ultra wide lens again. And here's another macro where the Pixel 9 Pro does maintain 48 megapixel. Now for this next set of images, I'm gonna have the Pixel 9 Pro XL JPEG on the left and the RAW image on the right. And we can see there that that RAW image definitely has more color depth. And there we are again, RAW there on the right. And here we have both images in RAW, Pro Max there on the right. Now moving over to standard, still with the primary camera. Now here full screen, RAW image, Pixel 9 Pro XL. And here's the 16 Pro Max. Okay, now we're gonna finish up the photo testing with a few portraits, look at skin tones, dynamic range, and color depth. Here's a side-by-side in portrait mode. 16 Pro Max rendered a little warmer there. Here's a full screen, Pixel 9 Pro XL, primary camera. And here's that 16 Pro Max. Another side-by-side. Moving back over to the Pixel 9 Pro, standard primary camera. There's the Pixel 9 Pro there in RAW. And there's the 16 Pro Max, 48 megapixel RAW. Now let's move back over to the 5x optical zoom. Now here I want to point out the Pixel 9 Pro XL actually holds on to the highlights in that shirt with a little bit more detail. Here back to the primaries. Side by side here in portrait mode. And here Pixel 9 Pro, 50 megapixel RAW. And there's the RAW image from the 16 Pro Max. I really like the RAW processing for both cameras. I think the 16 Pro Max is a little easier to edit the RAW imagery than the Pixel 9 Pro XL. You have to really know what you're doing in the edit to get the best out of that image, but they're both really good. And here we are once again, full resolution, primary camera. Pixel 9 Pro XL here. And there's that 16 Pro Max. And and one more from this series with a side-by-side, both with the primary camera. Okay friends, I want to share a brief message from SaharaCase, but stay tuned because we have a lot coming with video mode. Sahara offers a wide range of cases and they're giving you an exclusive 20% discount with code YTSahara20 at saharacase.com. Sahara also provides camera and screen protectors along with other accessories, making them a practical choice for safeguarding your mobile devices. They're a fantastic family-owned and operated US business that truly cares about their customers. Okay, now onto video mode, and we're going to start right away with ProRes 8K standard mode. Let's get into it. Pixel 9 Pro XL 4K HLG. And here's the 16 Pro Max. Standard 4K mode. Now moving over to 8K video in the Pixel 9 Pro. Here's that 4K ProRes with the 16 Pro Max. And one more shot here, ProRes log corrected with the Apple LUT. Now I think overall all the video modes looked good there. The Apple log of course has a little bit more color information when corrected with that LUT. But the 8K video boost feature from Google is really impressive too. Here with this side-by-side, both in 4K. Now here, I'm testing the image stabilization, both cameras in 4K. And I think walking through these trees, we can see that the 16 Pro Max image stabilization does a little bit better there. Moving back over to the Pixel 9 Pro 4K, their video mode has really improved since their previous cameras. Moving over now to the 16 Pro Max, wonderful looking image. And back over to the Pixel 9 Pro, they're an 8K video boost. And one thing I want to point out with the 8K video boost feature from the Pixel 9 Pro XL, it does have to upload to the Google Drive and it processes there, but then you just download it again. But overall, I think it's a great feature because it for sure improves the image quality and the image stabilization as well. Now here we are in low light, Pixel 9 Pro 8K. And moving over to the 16 Pro Max 4K ProRes. Pixel 9 Pro 4K. And there's that 4K 16 Pro Max. Okay, let's move on to the next set of videos for comparison. Here we have the 16 Pro Max 4K. Pixel 9 Pro XL 8K. Now moving over here to portrait mode, Pixel 9 Pro XL. 16 Pro Max, cinematic mode. Let's continue here with the Pixel 9 Pro, portrait mode. It's really the same as cinematic mode that you get with the 16 Pro Max. 16 Pro Max here, cinematic mode. I think both cameras did well there, but one thing I want to point out, the Pixel 9 Pro XL is high definition in portrait mode where it's 4K with the 16 Pro Max, and it does seem overall that does make a difference for image quality. Now here in portrait mode once again, and I wanted to test how well do those cameras handle backlighting in video mode. Moving back over to standard 4K, 16 Pro Max, a lot of detail there. And here, 8K Pixel 9 Pro XL. Here's a side-by-side, 8K there on the Pixel 9 Pro on the left. Back to full screen, Pixel 9 Pro 4K, checking the image stabilization and just overall image quality. Now moving over to the 16 Pro Max, standard 4K. It does really well in image stabilization. Pixel 9 Pro once again in 8K, a lot of detail there. And there's that 16 Pro Max 4K ProRes. Okay, for these next tests, we're gonna move to slow motion. iPhone 16 Pro Max now has 120 frames per second at 4K. Now, the Pixel 9 Pro XL does have 240 frames a second, but it's only in HD. Let's compare those quality-wise and see what we find. Here, the Pixel 9 Pro, HD 240 frames a second. And there's that 16 Pro Max 4K, 120 frames a second. I think there we could see that at 240 frames per second, the Google did take a hit in image quality. And I think iPhone got it right by doing 4K, 120 frames per second, but still maintaining high image quality. Now let's move over to 60p on both cameras. Here's the Pixel 9 Pro 4K 60p. Now moving over to the 16 Pro Max, 4K 60 frames a second slow motion. Looks really nice. Back over to the Pixel 9 Pro XL, 60 frames a second. And here we are once again, 16 Pro Max. So for this next test, I'm gonna use the 120 frames per second from the iPhone and the 60p from the Pixel 9 Pro XL because they're both in 4K. And here we have the Pixel 9 Pro XL 4K, 60 frames a second. And now moving over to the 16 Pro Max 4K, 120 frames per second. And we can see we have great dynamic range. And once again, that 16 Pro Max is pushing those green channels. The 120 frames per second 4K from the 16 Pro Max is quite impressive. Now moving back over to standard 4K on both cameras. And that little green orb there, that's from some of the backlighting. And we can see that the 16 Pro Max actually has it as well. That's pretty common with these cameras. Back over to the Pixel 9 Pro XL there, 4K. Now for this shot, I'm using the 2x zoom in 4K on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. And here's that 2x zoom from the 16 Pro Max. And let's go ahead and finish this series with the 5x optical zoom. Here with the Pixel 9 Pro, maintaining that 4K quality. And now with the 16 Pro Max, 4K, 5x optical zoom. Overall, a very nice image. Now for these next two shots, I'm using the ultra wide lens, and I think both cameras did just okay in that. Here's the Pixel 9 Pro, 4K ultra wide. We can see some blurring there on the edges, and yet the 16 Pro Max has that as well. I think the ultra wide is a nice feature to have, but you're gonna definitely take a hit in image quality on both models. Pixel 9 Pro, 8K. Here's that 16 Pro Max 4K ProRes log, color corrected with the Apple LUT. Now moving back over to the Pixel 9 Pro 8K. Now it's on to our last video test, and for this I'm gonna do something I haven't done before. I'm actually gonna lower the music, and I'm gonna be using just the natural audio to see how these microphones pick that up on both these cameras. So there it is, my friends. I really want to hear your thoughts. Make sure to leave a comment below. Any questions that you might have. I want to thank SaharaCase for having me once again. Go to their website, check them out, SaharaCase.com. Great family-owned business. But overall, which one do you own or which one would you buy? I'm hoping that this testing, it helps you decide. Both cameras do so well. I think it depends on what are you going to use them for. Whether it's professional video or both photo and video, they're both great. So leave a comment below. Make sure to like and subscribe. We have more content coming soon. Take care.